On the 20th of April 1979, 14-year-old Amanda Therese Robinson attended a school dance at St Mary's High School in Gateshead. Afterwards, she caught a bus home to Swansea. She was seen by a number of people after she got off the bus and was walking to her home only a few hundred metres away. Unfortunately, she never made it home and has not been seen since. That was 45 years ago, and in this two-part video, I will focus on the events surrounding her disappearance, the investigations, the impact on her family and friends, and a little bit about the persons of interest. Much of this information will come from detailed news reports on the inquest held in 2001 and 2002. I'll also briefly mention a couple of alternate theories proposed to me as to what may have happened to Amanda. But I'll begin with her brother, Mark Robinson's, brief account of what happened that night as reported in October 2021 on Newcastle's NBN television news.
Just a very popular kid who had a lot of friends.
Her brother Mark says Amanda promised she'd come home from a dance with a school friend.
She was supposed to get a lift home with the same person, but they left early or something. But Amanda rang my stepfather and asked if it was okay if she come home on the bus. He fell asleep and didn't pick her up, so she walked home.
Mark didn't say this, but other reports say that his stepfather fell asleep on the couch. So I assume he must have thought he'd wait 5 or 10 minutes before going to meet Amanda at the bus, but dozed off. Yeah, it's difficult to imagine how much guilt he must have felt at that. The school dance was on the Friday night, which was 13 days after Robin Hickey disappeared. And on the following Monday, we had the first newspaper reports of their disappearances, which was in the Newcastle Herald, being the 23rd of April 1979. So I'll just read the bits on Amanda. A 14-year-old Swansea girl who did not return home from a school dance on Friday night has become the second young girl missing from the Belmont Swansea area in the past 2 weeks. Police fear for the safety of the girl, Amanda Therese Robinson of George Street, Swansea, who was last seen boarding a bus at Gateshead soon after midnight on Friday. Police said Amanda Robinson went to a dance at St Mary's High School, Gateshead, on Friday night. She stayed at the dance until some friends, who had arranged to give her a lift home, arrived. Miss Robinson told her friends that she did not want to go home early and instead would catch a bus home, police said. It is believed that when the dance ended, the girl walked to a nearby bus stop with a group of friends. She telephoned her stepfather, Mr. E. Carter. Now, if I remember correctly, the bus stop was diagonally opposite where the telephone would have been. So the telephone box, as far as I remember, was on the corner of the highway and Sydney Street, where the shops are. And the bus stop is in front of St Mary's High School, which is diagonally opposite. So when the bus comes, she would have clearly seen it arrive, and the bus driver would have easily seen her running across the road, which I'll get to in a sec. So she rang her stepfather to say that she would be late home. Her friends waited until the bus came, saw the girl board the bus and left. She has not been seen since. Now, the Newcastle Herald did report 2 days later that she was seen getting off the bus at Swansea at about 12:20 a.m. And I'll go into that more later. Mr. Carter said last night he had checked all Amanda's friends, but nobody had seen her. I remember when she rang me Friday night, she had only just told me she was catching a bus home, when one of her friends yelled that the bus was coming, Mr. Carter said. I haven't heard from her since, he said. Police fear the girl may have been abducted after alighting from the bus. Now, information since seems to have been that they were assuming she was a runaway and working along those lines, but interesting it says that there. When last seen, she was wearing blue jeans, a yellow shirt, brown jumper and thongs. She is described as being about 165 centimetres or 5 foot 5 inches tall, of medium build, fair complexion with light brown medium length hair and brown eyes. Police said last night that they did not have any strong leads on the disappearances. Police reported several sightings of Miss Robinson yesterday, but all investigations failed to find the girl. Belmont detectives are in charge of inquiries. I did come across an interesting article in the Courier Mail that was published on the 29th of June 2019, and it pretty much describes the situation that would have been facing Amanda that night. So I'll just read a bit of that article as to what it says. 14-year-old Amanda Robinson is stranded. The school dance has finished. It's past 10:30 p.m, but she has no lift home 15 kilometres away. There has been a mix-up, and her school friend, whose father had driven them to the disco, has forgotten to take Amanda home. So I don't think that last bit's exactly correct, because everywhere else generally seems to say that her friend's father arrived early to pick them up, but Amanda wanted to stay until the end of the dance, so she said she'd catch the bus home instead. So continuing. This schoolgirl has never been out on her own before. In fact, she really shouldn't have gone to the disco at all, considering her mum, Anne, in hospital for a postnatal complication with her new baby, had originally said no. Yeah, I don't know if that reason is right as to why she was in hospital. Her mother was in hospital, but I don't know about that reason because I've never heard that anywhere before. Only at 4:30 p.m. that Friday afternoon, after a phone call to the hospital, had Amanda persuaded her mum to let her out by mentioning the lift. It's now getting late. I assume being when the dance finished at 10:30 p.m, that means. So, along with a bunch of teenagers, Amanda walks out of her school, St Mary's High at Gateshead, a suburb 12 kilometres south of Newcastle, and waits at the bus stop on the Pacific Highway. But, unknown to the school students, the late night bus has been cancelled. It's April 20, 1979, and there are no public transport apps, mobile phones, or Facebook. And, unknown to anyone, there's a killer on the loose. I had always thought it unusual that Amanda caught a bus that late at night, being midnight, as I would have thought the school dance would have ended at about 10 or 10:30, which seems to be the actual case. But with the bus being cancelled, it makes sense because from my memory, the late night buses back then were about every hour. So if one got cancelled, you'd have to wait another hour till the next one. So that pretty much explains that. The article also mentions it was unknown at the time that Robin Hickey had disappeared 13 days earlier and that Leanne Goodall had disappeared for months earlier, because none of that had been reported in the media up to that point. As the night wears on, some of the students dart across the highway to a phone box and ring home. So that's the diagonally opposite one at the shops. Parents start arriving. Amanda also dials home and speaks to her stepdad, Eddie Carter, but cuts short the call when the 348 bus from Newcastle arrives. Evidence is later given that her stepdad goes to bed. So I don't think he actually went to bed, because elsewhere it always says that he either fell asleep on the couch or that he simply fell asleep. So I think that may be a false assumption by the reporter, but anyway, it goes on to say, and does not pick her up from the local stop on the highway near their Swansea home, where she is dropped around 12:15 a.m. The 10-minute walk home is 900 metres and passes by the Swansea Bowling Club. Now, I found it interesting it mentions the Swansea Bowling Club, and it is the first media report I've seen over time that mentioned the Swansea Bowling Club, because it was not known until over 2 years later, in November 2021, that there was a possible link between her disappearance and a scout meeting that was held there that night. Because Warren McCorriston, who is the current strongest person of interest, it's believed he would have been at that meeting, and in 2021 he was convicted of violent sexual assaults against women in the 1980s and 1990s. Also at that meeting were the identical twin Mateer brothers, who have been convicted of multiple sexual assaults against boys in the 1980s and 1990s. And another person that was in attendance was George Cecil, and he was convicted of having child pornography and was also alleged to have sexually assaulted a boy in the 1970s. And these last three people, they were scout leaders and also bus drivers, coincidentally. It kind of makes you wonder why Strike Force Fenwick didn't at least discover the bowling club connection in 1998. As it seems Strike Force Arapaima was able to acquire the visitors book 23 years later, after Strike Force Fenwick commenced, which would also be 42 years after that actual meeting. So that was in 2021 when they made that connection. Though, to my knowledge, prior to the actual inquest in 2001-2002, there was no record of sexual offences, either alleged or with convictions, against either of the three Scout leader bus drivers. And there was something with Warren McCorriston, though, because he was acquitted of an attempted rape charge in 1981 that was alleged to have occurred in 1980. But, yes, as far as I'm aware, none of those people were on the radar as persons of interest at that time, unless they were in the 60 that were being looked at by Strike Force Fenwick, but they only seriously looked at 6 of those at the inquest, so maybe they picked the wrong ones. But with Warren McCorriston, that's only alleged as well. In any case, I did make a video at the end of 2021 about the Swansea Bowling Club connection. If you'd like to learn more, I'll put a link in the description below. Now, going back to the Courier Mail article, people at a party later say they see a girl fitting her description about a block from her home. There's also a report of a scream nearby in the early hours of the morning, but it's never investigated. Now, this report of a scream was mentioned at the inquest by 2 different witnesses. The first of these was reported in the Newcastle Herald on the 15th of December 2001, and it stated, "A woman who lived in Swansea, a Mrs. Farrell, contacted police and said she heard a girl scream near a factory in the area at the time Amanda Robinson was last seen alive on the night of April 20, 1979, Mr. Sardi told the court." I may be pronouncing his name wrong. That information was apparently never followed up. The factory was searched by police, but no statement was obtained from Mrs. Farrell or her daughter as to what they heard, he said. Mr. Sadie said 2 uniformed police officers were doing a general patrol of Swansea around the same time Amanda disappeared. That was significant, Mr. Sadie said. 2 police officers in the area at the time. But it is unforgivable that these officers were not spoken to at length about what they may have seen on their shift, such as suspicious vehicles. There is no record that police even undertook a canvass of nearby homes, and made detailed statements. In that context, the investigation would have to be regarded as incompetent. But anyway, back to the screams. The second witness is actually the brother of Neville Drinkwater, who was one of the 6 persons of interest that was being considered at the inquest. I should mention here that the 6 persons of interest were, to quote the coroner at the inquest, although highly unlikely to be involved at all, could not be completely eliminated. How Neville Drinkwater became one of those persons of interest is described in the Newcastle Herald on the 20th of December 2001. Retired detective Maureen Summers told the inquest she was seconded from the traffic branch in 1979 to act as a decoy in an operation to catch men who picked up female hitchhikers in Belmont and Swansea. We worked a couple of weekends, but I recall one particular night when a person was trapped in the operation, she said. A car drove round the block 3 times. The driver then stopped and tried to engage me in conversation, but I kept walking. He followed me, and detectives Jeff Wright and Brian Mooney detained him. The man's car and house were searched, and police found women's underwear, a roll of tape, and pornographic literature. Ms. Summers said the man was considered a significant person of interest. But going back to the screams, the Sydney Morning Herald on the 3rd of July 2002 states that Neville's brother said he, meaning his brother Neville Drinkwater, had told him in 1979 about hearing screams and a screech of tyres on the night Amanda went missing. But he did not pass this information on to police until 20 years later. So you kind of wonder why he wouldn't have reported at the time, since he was being questioned, but maybe not. So anyway, there are 2 witness accounts of screams being heard. However, it was reported in the Newcastle Herald on the 13th of December 2001 that a witness who saw Amanda in Lake Road recalled that it was a quiet night and did not hear any screams or calls of distress after they had reached the highway. So the screams that were heard may not have been Amanda's, which leads me on to an article in the Newcastle Herald on the 19th of December 2001. And it says here, Mr. Sadie told the inquest there was a note in the police running sheet that a woman reported a person had tried to drag her into a car in the Swansea area the same night Amanda Robinson went missing. Mr. Guyat, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, and he's a retired detective constable, agreed that would be important information that would need to be followed up. But there is no record of it being followed up, Mr. Sadie said. If it wasn't followed up, that would be a cause of concern, wouldn't it? Mr. Guyat agreed. So perhaps this woman screamed when someone attempted to drag her into the car, and that was the screams that were heard. But more importantly, perhaps this person who grabbed her was the one that was responsible for Amanda's disappearance. Because it's hard to imagine that there would be two different people trying to drag someone into their car on the same night in the same suburb. So it's a bit coincidental. So if that report was followed up, we might not be still wondering what happened to Amanda. So her family and friends would now have closure instead of 45 years later, still be wondering and but they would have been more able to easily move on with their lives, even though it would have been a bit sadder. Now, the Newcastle Herald reported on the 22nd of February 2002, there was one person of interest who at the time of Amanda's disappearance was confirmed by a witness to be nearby at the time. So the article says, a 53-year-old invalid pensioner told the state coroner yesterday he could not explain why he was in the area where Amanda Robinson disappeared 22 years ago because his memory was shot. So, guess it can be hard to remember things from 22 years ago. He had been arrested for indecent assault on two young girls. Coroner John Abernathy heard that the police had spoken to the man several times about his whereabouts on April 20, 1979, the night Amanda Robinson disappeared. He had given a different story each time. In the witness box yesterday, the man said he wasn't lying, he just had a very bad memory. Counsel assisting the coroner, Patrick Sadie, said a witness had seen the person of interest around midnight, not far from where Amanda Robinson was last seen in Lake Road. The man agreed with Mr. Sadie that he drove a 1979 Datsun Homer van and often went to Swansea to check his boat. I don't know why I was down at the lake that night, he told the court. I would take a lie detector test to show I didn't have anything to do with that girl's disappearance. Mr. Sadie said the man told police he saw a car hooning around the street when he was checking his boat, that he had been fishing at Swansea, that he went to the lake to see a man who owed him money, and that he had been moving furniture. So I think that's 4 different stories, yes. The man had told police on one occasion that he knew Amanda Robinson because she rode a horse on the nearby reserve, but on another occasion had said he had no idea who she was. It should be noted that in another article, the Newcastle Herald had reported Amanda Robinson did have an interest in horses and horse riding. You knew that police were inquiring about a missing girl, So why did you tell them different versions if you had nothing to do with it, Mr. Sadie said. The man replied, I get the dates all confused. I know there are inconsistencies, but I wasn't lying to them. I was doing my best to remember and to help them. Mr. Abernathy told the man, You're involved in this because you gave differing versions to the police of where you were that night. Okay, so I'll now move on to witnesses at the inquest who say they saw Amanda Robinson at Swansea. The first of these was reported in the Newcastle Herald on the 14th of June 2001. A former schoolmate of Amanda Robinson told Toronto Coroner's Court he believes he was the last person to see the 14-year-old before she disappeared into the night. Dwayne Peter Burns, salesman of Condon in Queensland, spoke to police recently about what he saw 20 years ago. Mr. Burns, who lived 2 streets away from Ms. Robinson and went to St. Mary's High with her, said he saw her walking home alone about midnight on April 20, 1979. Now, I do have a bit of a problem with the reporter saying that Mr. Burns went to St. Mary's High School with her, because I recall at the time St. Mary's High was an all-girls school and didn't become co-educational until a couple of years after I left school in 1981. And I checked the school's website and it does say that it became co-educational in 1983, which was 4 years later. So perhaps with it being over 20 years later, Mr. Burns just said he knew her from going to school with her, meaning primary school perhaps, and the reporter just made a false assumption that it was St. Mary's High School, since in 2001-2 it had been a co-educational school for nearly 20 years. So I'll continue with that article. Mr. Burns said he knew that Amanda went missing when it appeared in newspapers in 1979. He said he spoke to his friends at school and they went to police to tell them what they had seen. We delegated 2 of the group to go to the police and they did, he said. They were interviewed and I thought I would probably be contacted by the police then, but they never came. When I read about the Strike Force investigation, I contacted the police and gave them a statement on August 1, 1998. I believe I was the last or one of the last people to see Amanda alive. We had been to a party and my friends and I were escorting some girls that we knew to the taxi rank in Lake Road, or it says Lake Street here, Swansea, because it was dark. I know it was around midnight because we were all aged about 16 and we had midnight curfews to be home. I saw a government bus pull away on the main road and I saw a figure walking towards us on the southern side of Lake Road. It was Amanda, I have no doubt, because she walked past us and we knew her from school. So it seems he probably did say from school. She was alone and was heading towards her home, which was just up the road. In those days, there was a BP service station on the road, and I saw her walk past that, and she was probably near the Salvation Army Hall when I last saw her. A carload of young blokes went past and turned at the lights on the highway. We watched them because they were pretty rowdy, but I don't remember seeing any other cars around at the time. Amanda was still working towards her home, and we lost sight of her as we sat at the taxi rank. It was as though she just disappeared into the night. It appears the next witness reports may be from two others that were in the same group as Dwayne Burns. The Newcastle Herald on the 13th of December 2001 states, former Swansea High School student Mark Vasella was possibly the last person to see teenager Amanda Robinson alive before she was snatched from a street near her home. Mr. Vasella, now a businessman in Melbourne, told the Missing Girls inquest yesterday that he saw Amanda walking past the fire station in Lake Road, Swansea, on the night she disappeared. Amanda was not far from her home in George Street. She was never seen again. Counsel assisting the coroner, Barrister Patrick Sadie, said Mr. Vasella may have been the last person to see Amanda Robinson before she disappeared. He had been at a party with school friends at a house in Macquarie Street, Swansea. We left around midnight. We were in a group of 6 and we were walking up Lake Road to catch a taxi at the rank on the highway, he said. About level with the fire station, we saw the girl walking past us. She was about 3 metres from me. She just appeared to be walking home. Everything appeared normal. He said the group continued walking to the highway and he caught a taxi with a friend to his home at Caves Beach. Mr. Vasella said that when he heard the young girl had gone missing, he and his friends went to the police with their information. Shane Dunn, now of Rathmines, was in the same group walking towards the taxi rank. I remember seeing a girl get off a bus on the highway and walk up Lake Road, Mr. Dunn said. He recalled that it was a quiet night and did not hear any screams or calls of distress after they reached the highway. More than 3 years before the inquest, from January to April 1998, newspaper reports said that the last sighting of Amanda was in Pelican Street, or 3 doors from her home. The first of these gave the most comprehensive information as to why. This was on the 10th of January 1998 in the Newcastle Herald, where it says, fresh information emerged yesterday in relation to a teenager who disappeared almost 20 years ago, revealing that she was last sighted 3 doors from her Swansea home. Amanda Robinson, 14, went missing without a trace on April 20, 1979, on the way home from a school dance. Ever since, reports have stated she was last seen walking along Lake Road, Swansea. Her mother, Anne, revealed yesterday that there had been a later sighting in Pelican Street, just 3 doors from home. To think that the dear little thing got so close to home, an emotional Mrs. Robinson said yesterday. Her daughter had been at a dance at St. Mary's High School, Gateshead, and had telephoned her stepfather to tell him to meet her at the bus stop. When he was not there, Amanda decided to walk home. She never made it. As Amanda walked along Pelican Street, her home in clear sight, she was abducted, possibly by a serial killer. She was never seen again. Now, all reports I have found after April 1998 state she was last seen in Lake Road, and this other alleged sighting is not referred to ever again. I can only assume it was deemed an unreliable sighting, or perhaps it was confirmed to be someone else. I don't know, but just seems in those 3 or 4 months there was a belief that she was seen closer to home, and that no longer exists. So we now say she was last seen in Lake Road, Swansea.
We just need answers, because you can't live like this. It's just hell on earth, heartache and suffering for 40 years.
Okay, this is the end of the first part of this video about the disappearance of Amanda Robinson 45 years ago. I hope you found it interesting so far, and we'll watch the concluding second part of this video. In the second part, I will cover the disappearance of Amanda from the perspective of her family and friends, including the friends who attended the school dance and their versions of what happened there. I'll also look at the investigations that were undertaken at the time, a bit of a look at the persons of interest, and I'll also cover briefly a couple of theories that people have proposed to me in response to my videos as comments or even direct messages. So please subscribe and click on the bell to be notified of my future videos. I'm David A. Elliott. Have a good one and see you around like a Rissole.